guys, it's Kira and welcome to another video. Today I'm very excited to be doing another 24-hour readathon. Feels like it's been quite a long time since my last 24-hour readathon, and after the horrific reading month that I had in January, I feel like I need a 24 hours dedicated completely to reading just to get me back on track. And you know I love a themed 24-hour readathon, so given that it's February, I'm sure it's no surprise that the theme of this 24-hour readathon is Valentine's Day. How original. So for the next 24 hours, I'm going to be trying to read as many romance books as possible and probably doing a little bit of self-care, self-love and all of that kind of fun stuff as well. As much as I love Valentine's Day, I also love Galentine's Day, as I'm sure many of you guys do as well. So this is not a solo 24-hour readathon. I'm going to be doing this one alongside two friends. I'm doing this 24-hour readathon alongside my friends Sarah and Emily, both of whom I will link their channels down below so you can go and check them out. But essentially we're just going to be chatting via Instagram and stuff all day long and all trying to read as much as possible. Now I am going to be starting this readathon in a little bit. It is currently mid-afternoon on Friday the 5th of February I think, and this readathon officially starts at 7 p.m, but it'll be dark by then, so I wanted to introduce the readathon now and then I'll catch up with you later on when I officially start reading. But I am going to let you know the first book that I'm planning to read, and that book is All About Us by Tom Ellen. I was actually given this book for Christmas. I always keep the gift cards in there, and this one was from M, so I was very excited to read this one because she always has the most wonderful book recommendations. And this also seems like a bit of a festive romance, but I love Christmas. I don't care if it's not Christmas time, I'm still going to get excited about it. So this one seems like a really intriguing romance because it says Ben has always loved the month of December, but this year his relationship with Daphne is on the rocks. It's missing its usual magic. And then his old friend Alice gets back in touch. Ben's always thought of Alice as the one that got away, and he can't help but wonder, what if he'd done things differently all those years ago? He never imagines he might get to find out, but when a stranger sells Ben a mysterious watch one cold winter's night, he's astonished to wake up the next morning on the 5th of December 2005, the day he first kissed Daphne, leaving Alice behind. Now Ben must make the biggest decision of his life all over again, but this time around, will he finally find the courage to follow his heart? That sounds incredible and I'm so excited, so I'm going to be starting this one at 7 p.m. on the dot. Okay, so it is 9:45 p.m, so it's been almost 3 hours of the readathon, although technically I only started reading at 8 p.m. because for the first hour of the readathon I was watching Call the Midwife and eating pesto pasta, so I didn't really make the best use of that hour. However, this readathon is all about love, and seeing as I love pesto pasta and Call the Midwife, I'm still counting it as a good start. And then I have, for the last couple of hours, been reading All About Us, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm on page 152 currently, so I'm almost halfway through this book, and it's really interesting. As I kind of described in the blurb earlier on, essentially we have our main character Ben at the beginning of the book. It's almost Christmas 2020 and he is in an unhappy marriage with a girl, Daphne, that he met at university 15 years prior, and then they've kind of grown apart over the years. She's really career driven, ambitious, successful, and he essentially is not. And he starts kind of thinking about what might have happened if things would have gone differently. Then he meets this guy who gives him this weird watch, and essentially that watch every night at midnight takes him back to a moment in his life previously around Christmas. So he goes back to university, goes back to various other events throughout his life, and they essentially kind of, bless you Gatsby, the rabbit is sneezing, but they essentially kind of build up this picture of everything that went into his life to kind of make his relationship the way it was, and kind of decide whether he wants to put the work into making the relationship work or whether he wants different things. So it's really interesting, and I think the watch is a really great tool for kind of exploring that history and kind of giving you as the reader a bit more context. The only thing is that I feel like as the reader you're probably meant to sympathise with Ben, and although I do think he's a really nice character, at the very beginning I do genuinely feel like if I was his wife, and at 34 years old he didn't really have a job or like, you know what he was doing and couldn't even be bothered to go to a party with her for Christmas and that kind of thing, I'd probably be kind of annoyed with him as well. So he isn't actually the most sympathetic protagonist, although I'm sure he's meant to be. I just personally feel like she's probably drawn the short straw there and she's pulling all the weight, but that might change. We're still like halfway through the book, so I'm interested to see how the rest of it goes, but I'm definitely enjoying it. I think I'm going to make a cup of tea and just try and read as much of this as I can before I inevitably fall asleep, because I'm an old lady, so we know it's going to happen. It is just after 11 p.m. and I finished my first read of the readathon, All About Us. I think this is a solid 3-star read. Overall enjoyable, and clearly didn't take me too long to read, given that I started this at about 8 p.m. and it took me about 3 hours to get through the whole thing. It was a nice, classic, fast-paced romance read, and I did genuinely really enjoy the like time hopping thing. It was obviously set at Christmas time, although I wouldn't say this is a Christmassy book, aside from the fact that the time hops take you between various Christmas days for the most part. But on the whole, you definitely don't need to read this actually at Christmas time, but it does give it a bit of a like modern day Scrooge, A Christmas Carol type vibe, because you're kind of getting like that whole era of your ways, Christmas past, present and future type thing, and I do think that that worked really, really well. However, I feel like I have 3 main criticisms of this book, which is why it's 3-star rather than 4. The first one is kind of a little bit silly, but the main character's wife is called Daphne. Absolutely fine, that's a nice name, but for the most part he calls her Daff, 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 and it's just non-stop on every single page, D-A-F-F, and for some reason, every time I saw it like that, it just really irritated me, because I'm like, why bother coming up with like a cool, unusual, not so common name if you're just gonna shorten it to something really not that nice? So that was the first critique of this one. The second critique of it is, structurally, most of this book, I'd say a good 300 pages, are really all about the guy's relationship problems, what caused the problems, how he might fix the problems, what he would do differently about the problems. It's all about the problems, and it's one of those books that then takes a really tiny amount of pages right at the end to super quickly skim over the resolving of those problems. And I just feel like if you're going to make the problem such a key theme, it should at least get a little bit more time and description for the resolution, because I just feel like when you've built it up that much, it deserves a bit more resolution. And then the final thing that I didn't like about this book was the main character. I just didn't find him very likeable. He was a really, really douchey guy, and I know it's kind of meant to be like Ebenezer Scrooge, like I said, error of his ways, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But in the end, I just felt like he actually didn't deserve any of the chances that he was given, because he was just literally a massive time waster and his wife should have found someone better. But that is beside the point, and I guess I'm being a little bit picky there. I just feel like, especially in a romance, it's nice when your main character is someone that you can root for, whereas I did feel like in this one, he wasn't an unlikable character, but he just didn't feel particularly like someone that I wanted to root for, because I just didn't feel like he had much of anything about him. But even still, I think the structure, the theme, and the time travel and all that kind of stuff was enough to make this an enjoyable read, and I would definitely recommend it, especially for just like a nice light-hearted romance. I don't always need romances to be the most perfect, you know, bulletproof reads. They can sometimes just be nice, fluffy and enjoyable, and this definitely ticked that box. Now, quite stupidly, because I decided to do a 24-hour readathon today, I have actually got a really busy Saturday morning, mostly because I'm filming some yoga videos for my yoga YouTube channel. Jay and I go to a studio that I teach at when it's actually not locked down and it's open, but because it's just empty at the moment, I can go and film there, and we basically try and do it only like once a month and film several videos. So I'm probably going to be busy for a good couple of hours in the morning, which means not so much reading is going to be happening, but I'm going to try and get a really good night's sleep, maybe do a little bit of reading before going tomorrow, and then just blast out as much as I can after we get back. But for now, one book down, I'm feeling pretty good, and I certainly have had an enjoyable evening. Good morning guys, just because it's almost 12 o'clock, but it is now Saturday, so the second day of this 24-hour readathon, and I'm ready to do some more reading. As I mentioned yesterday evening, I went to go and film several yoga videos this morning, which did take up quite a bit of time, but it's done now, and it is an absolutely miserable day. It's pouring with rain. It's a classic February day, but that means it's absolutely perfect for staying inside for as much of the day as possible and doing as much reading as I can. I just nipped to Cafe Nero on the way home for a delicious coconut vanilla latte, which was so very needed after a morning of yoga, and I'm very excited to do a delicious banana bread taste test. So as I said, this readathon is in collaboration with Emily and Sarah. Sarah also lives in Leeds like me, so we do a weekly social distance walk, and this week, yesterday when we went on our walk, she brought some banana bread. So we have they're both vegan. We have a Biscoff banana bread and then a Biscoff and chocolate banana bread. So I'm going to taste both of these because why the hell not? And I have a feeling I'm going to love them because, banana bread. So I'm going to start with just a plain Biscoff one because I feel like the chocolate one will be a stronger flavour. Oh my god, the texture. Wow. Oh, I love banana bread so much. And now time for the chocolate. Melty chocolate in a heated up banana bread. You just can't beat it. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Sarah loves food just like me, and I will link her Instagram down below because she shares so many incredible recipes, and that banana bread is so good. So big thank you to Sarah. Now I'm going to serve that with some vanilla Greek style yogurt from Alpro, and maybe put a little bit of granola on to make it into a proper meal, but really I'm just there for the banana bread. And now time to decide what to read next. So I have had a few choices, but I eventually settled on Trust Exercise by Susan Choi. This blurb says, Sarah and David are in love, the obsessive, uncertain love of teenagers on the edge of adulthood. They've just started their first term at a performing arts school where the rules are made by their magnetic drama instructor, Mr. Kingsley, who initiates them into a dangerous game. 2 decades on, we learn the real story of these teenagers' lives is even larger and darker than we imagined, and the consequences have lasted a lifetime. Trust Exercise is a brilliant, unforgettable novel about what we lose, gain, and never get over as we are initiated into adulthood's mysterious structures of sex and power. Now this one was a gift from Em, my friend from her channel, A Little Writer Em, and she got this one because we both love Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, and this was in a list of books that you might like if you also like Conversations with Friends. So I'm really excited about this one. It sounds like a bit more of a gritty, complicated book that focuses on romance but isn't a classic romance novel. So I'm very excited about this, and it's also not too long, which should bode well in my favour because it's almost 12 o'clock and we only have 7 hours left of the readathon. Okay, so it is now nearly 3 p.m. and I'm just over halfway into trust exercise. My thoughts on this are so unclear because honestly this is kind of a weird book. We're following mostly a girl, Sarah, who is at like a performing arts college, and it's kind of about her up and down relationship with this guy David. But the entire dynamic of this performing arts school and the way that the teachers and students interact and the way that the students interact with each other, Sarah's self-perception and the way that she interacts with other students is just very, very bizarre, and I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. I can see why potentially there would be some similarities between this and Sally Rooney's works, just in the sense that she's quite like a removed, solitary main character who probably seems like relatively intellectual and kind of very self-destructive and engages in a lot of like self-sabotaging behaviours. But I feel like the characters in this book feel very removed, to the sense that you don't really connect with them at all, whereas I do feel like with Sally Rooney, she creates these incredibly vivid and realistic characters that, although they maybe feel slightly elevated from like real people, you still feel able to connect with them, whereas I do feel like in this one I'm not connecting with the characters quite as much. There was a quote that I liked from quite early on in the book actually, page 17, which basically talks about like how the communication issues arise between various characters and how communication is essentially at the root of all of the problems of these relationships. And it simply says, to David, love meant declaration, wasn't that the whole point? To Sarah, love meant a shared secret, wasn't that the whole point? And of course these two characters never really communicate the fact that they view love and the exploration and sort of showing of love very, very differently, and that obviously then leads to many problems later on because they're not really on the same wavelength or level in terms of their understanding of what the relationship should be. So not enjoying this book, but just not really sure how to feel about it because it's just a little bit weird, and I do feel like not being able to connect with the characters always limits my ability to enjoy a book to a certain extent, but still interesting. And I've got just over half now, so I'm on page 133 and it's got about 250 pages altogether. It is 4:45 in the afternoon, so we've got basically just over 2 hours of the readathon left, and I did just finish reading the second book of the readathon, which was a massively disappointing read. Didn't care about any of the characters, didn't particularly like the structure. In particular, I said particular so many times, but in particular, the thing that I didn't like about this book was that it constantly switched between first and third person, which made the parts in third person feel very, very clinical and like almost stage direction-y. Now this book is set partially at a performing arts school, so I'm not sure if that's like a conscious decision to make those, like, for example, parts where it says Karen did this and Karen went here and Karen thought this. It just feels very, very clinical and like stage directions that should be brought to life with more emotion but aren't. And I just didn't really vibe with that. And then parts of it were in first person, which was slightly better. The one thing that was kind of interesting about this book that I did kind of like was that it was split broadly into two parts, and it turns out that by the time you get to the second part, the third part was actually a work of fiction and was like a memoir, so that kind of adds a little bit of intrigue and extra interest into the story. But on the whole, didn't love it. I feel like going into it with the expectation of liking it as much as Conversations with Friends probably set me up for a bit of failure, but I am such a character-driven reader, and so when I don't love characters, I don't love books. Like, I just feel like I need to be invested in at least some of the characters and what's happening to them in order to actually care. And even though in the book that I read last night, All About Us, I didn't like the main character, I still found him interesting enough to be invested in the story and what was happening, and the whole narrative really pulled me in. Whereas in this one, I found it almost to be written in a way that felt like it was too elevated, or was trying to be too elevated to the point where it just didn't really connect with me. So wouldn't necessarily recommend this, especially if you go in with that expectation of liking it as much as Sally Rooney, because that's never going to go well. So because there's only 2 hours left of the readathon, I'm not sure I'm going to finish another whole book, but I am going to make a start on a third book. And the book I'm going to start is The Opposite of Always by Justin A. Reynolds. The back of this one says, when Jack meets Kate at a party, he knows he's falling hard. It's almost happily ever after until 6 months later Kate dies, and this love story should end there. But Kate's death sends Jack back in time to the moment they first met, giving him the chance to try and save her this time. When a choice he makes turns deadly for someone else, Jack has to work out what he's willing to do and let go to save the people he loves. So kind of weirdly another time travel romance type story, so I'm kind of interested to see how this one compares to the one that I read last night, and I'm going to make a start on this one now, and I'll catch up with you in a little bit. But before I do, can I just mention that I've woken up this morning, right, it's obviously no longer this morning, with a massive bump on my head here, and I have no recollection of bumping my head in the night, but that's literally all that makes sense because it hurts so much and I have no idea what I've done. Alright, it's just after 7 p.m, which very sadly means that this readathon is officially over, and I made it to page 251 of Opposite of Always, so that's over halfway, and oh my god, I so wish that I started this book earlier in the day because I'm loving it. It's so good. I'm really enjoying it. I really do seem to like that time travel element to romance novels because I really enjoyed that about the first book I read in this readathon, and I'm really enjoying it about this one. However, the main character in this book, Jack, is far more likeable than the main character in All About Us, which means I'm liking this book even more. Essentially, as I described in the blurb of this book, it's all about a guy who meets a girl and then 6 months later she dies, but he then keeps going back in time and trying to figure out if he can save her. But then more and more things keep going wrong in his life as he tries to change what seems to be the inevitable. It's so interesting, I'm really enjoying it, and there's an element of mystery because he's gradually finding out more and more about what causes Kate's death in each time that he goes back in time. So it's really interesting and I'm absolutely going to continue on with it. Now, there's nothing worse than horrible yellow lighting when it's dark outside, so I am going to continue reading and I'll do a proper wrap up of my thoughts on all 3 of the books that I read during this 24-hour readathon tomorrow when it is light outside again. But for now, I'm going to get back to reading and I'll catch up with you in the morning. Okie dokie, it is now Sunday and I just finished up reading Opposite of Always, and oh my god, what a good book. Although I technically didn't finish reading this one within the 24-hour readathon, I'm totally counting this one as my favourite read from this 24-hour readathon because it was just incredible. Completely, absolutely by coincidence, ended up with more of a time travelling theme to this readathon than I first anticipated, but this was such a fun way of looking at basically, like, I think the mindset that most people would have when they're faced with crisis or loss or grief, which is obviously to kind of wonder what would happen if I could do it differently, or what if I was able to save them, or what if we could have changed this or that or anything. And I feel like that's a massive part of like grief and trying to process what has happened to you. But in this book, Jack actually gets that opportunity to see how things would be changed, and I think it's a great way of kind of looking at the fact that actually a lot of these things are totally outside of our control, and sometimes in the case of Jack, you get chance after chance after chance to try and change this thing, but sometimes things just can't be changed. Jack was such a wonderful main character, absolutely love this book. I'd highly recommend it to anyone. It was amazing and I just loved it. It was exactly the kind of romance that I like, which is kind of like quick, easy to read, and yet definitely more gritty and just sort of with a little bit more substance to it than just a pure romance. I feel like this one was quite complicated, had this really interesting dynamic of time travel, and I just loved it. So, counting the 251 pages of this book that I actually read during the 24-hour readathon, because it is about 500 pages altogether, I actually managed to read a total of 861 pages during my Romance of Valentine's 24-hour readathon, because the first book that I read, All About Us, was 300 253 pages, I think, and then the second book I read, Trust Exercise, was about 257. So altogether, that brings us up to 861. And I definitely had a really lovely time. I certainly indulged in some self-love, watching great TV shows, eating pesto pasta every single day, because honestly, when you've cracked perfection, why bother changing it, and reading some great books, or at least one incredible book and a couple of alright books. And I'm sure it's no surprise that, you know, of these three books, Opposite of Always is by far my favourite. I've rated both of the other books, All About Us and Trust Exercise, 3 stars, but Opposite of Always is absolutely a 5-star read. It was so good, and I'm so glad that I decided to read it. But I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on all 3 of the books that I picked up over the last 24 hours. I certainly had a fun time reading them, trying out some new things, and of course just chilling out with good books is always a good way to spend a weekend. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this one is in collaboration with 2 of my friends, Sarah and Emily, so both of their channels will be linked down below, and their vlogs as well, so you can go and check them out and see what they ended up reading. But I hope you enjoyed hearing all of my thoughts and seeing what I got up to, and happy Valentine's Day, guys!